Hello, welcome to today's sociocultural screencast. We're going to be looking at violence in sport. It's our first area within the contemporary issues part of the course. So what we're going to be looking at then, we've all heard of the term violence, and certainly with regard to sport. So what we're going to be considering then is we're going to be considering when things take place in a violent manner outside the rules of either the game that the players are taking part in or the spectators who are watching. Okay, we're going to be looking specifically at what causes this violence to take place, and then we're going to have a look at some strategies that could prevent it from taking place. On top of that, we're going to have a look at some implications of violence in sport to society, the sport, and the performance. I just put down onto here. You've got the kind of key parts of the specification there. You could get any question like this. The exam questions you could get would be something along the lines of explain the causes of player violence, or describe the causes of player violence. 2 marks. 2018 exam was describe the causes of spectator violence. Okay, going down from there, you could get separate questions that ask you to have an understanding of the implications of violence in sport on the wider society, on sport itself that the violence is taking place in, and finally to the performers who are taking part in the sport. Okay, finally we're going to have a look at the thing that kind of is obviously something that governing bodies are extremely keen to kind of look into, and that's strategies to prevent violence taking place, both from players and also from spectators. So that's your kind of area. Your exam questions could be any one of, I suppose, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories. Okay, so let's have a look then. So starting off, we'll start with player violence. I've got a picture here, Roy Keane, Patrick Vieira. There's lots of players I could have put in there, but when there's kind of there's a violent act that's outside of the rule of the game, what causes players to want to do that to each other? Okay, so first one then, frustration. Now frustration can be caused by a variety of things. It can be due to kind of poor decisions by the officials, or in fact it could be just individual poor performance. You get frustrated, the red mist descends, and an aggressive or violent act will take place. Okay, if we get out from here, another one can be rivalry. So often there can be traditional rivalries. I'll put Birmingham City versus Aston Villa here. I could put something like Celtic versus Rangers in Scotland, which I'll talk a little bit more about when it comes to spectator violence. This rivalry ramps up the emotional intensity and can cause players to be on the edge and more likely to commit violent acts because they know the tradition and that kind of historical importance to the game. On from that, something called the win ethic. Now, the win ethic is kind of something that is embedded, ingrained in modern sport. And, you know, if you're playing professional sport, there's quite simply one goal every time you play, that is to win. And the win ethic proposes that you win at all costs. You'll do it at any cost to be successful. And if that means being violent, if that means, kind of stopping a really important player for the opposition by committing a violent act, you will do it. On top of that, nature of the game. So I think, sports such as rugby in Great Britain, but if you then go out to kind of American football in America, the nature of these games encourage contact. Okay, therefore there is more chance of this contact spilling over into violent acts. I mean, of course, you look at things like boxing as well. These are activities where the nature of the game is based around contact, which could easily overspill into violence. Final one, okay, we're going to look at is this concept of dehumanize. Okay, so basically, if you look at things like American football as a sport, they have so many pads and helmets and things like that on. What happens is that some people propose that kind of violence is more likely because by wearing pads, helmets all over your body, it almost dehumanizes the sports performer. Therefore, people feel like they can go in with excess force because they're dehumanized. They can't get hurt. So this increases the likelihood of violence taking place. So we have a look at that. Hopefully, you can see how they would separate. You've got nice, easy ones to look at. There are other ones on top of that. I mean, if you want to make other notes, things like the score in the game. So, for example, a team is losing, let's say in rugby, it's 50-0, and suddenly someone in the team, because the score is so heavy and it's humiliating, that can lead to violence. So if you want to add any extra ones on, you can, but I think there's quite a lot of categories here, so let's try and keep it relatively simple. So going from there then, if that's the causes of player violence, what is it that we can do? Now, if you're playing in a sport and you're important to a team, you get frustrated, okay, and in that frustration, the act of frustration leads to an act of violence, okay. The number one thing, if you are an important player to the team and you enjoy playing for that team, the worst thing that is going to hurt you with regard to kind of the future is going to be the following: the punishment or bans, okay. So long-term bans can really put a spanner in your works. I mean, Luis Suarez was at kind of 8-9 game ban when he bit someone in a game. So you're looking at that thinking long-term bans can be as a real kind of a deterrent to do it in the future. Not so much for him. So if we go on from there, officials. Okay, so the thing is here that if we want to make sure that there is a lack of frustration, like poor decisions by the officials, it's really important that to prevent violence, we make sure that the officials we have got are better trained, they're more professional. You hear now of Premier League football referees being professional, working full time towards being an official. On top of that, they've trialled things in the Champions League, Europa League and UEFA competitions by having 5 officials to try and stop that kind of, or certainly to detect violence taking place. That is very much inconclusive as to whether that works. Well, a lot of people say it's very conclusive that it doesn't work because they seem to miss everything. But that is one strategy that's been used to prevent player violence. Next one. This is a really important point because you're going to be looking at a lot of different kind of ethics and deviance-based aspects. And ultimately, if somebody does something that's against the rules of the game consistently, it's really important that a program of education takes place. And education with regard to violence will come in the form of anger management. So I suppose you're looking at things. There's a particular kind of a clinic linked to sport called the Sporting Chance Clinic, set up by Tony Adams 15, 20 years ago. And they basically take people in, such as Joey Barton, I remember, is particularly known for violent acts, and kind of try and educate them with regard to how to manage your anger. Technology then. The biggest strategy to prevent player violence nowadays is, if you're playing in professional sports such as football and rugby, you are not getting away with violent acts because, it's like being in an episode of Sporting Big Brother. You are being watched by cameras from everywhere. So you've got a rugby, you have a television match official who can pick up anything like that for sightings, for example, multiple camera angles. You've got retrospective action for kind of violent acts. People can look back at it, and you've got, VAR now in football. So you've got loads of examples of technology which we'll look at more as we go through the course. So that's starting off there. That's your first thought on player violence. If we move through now, then let's have a look at spectator violence. So we've got them spectator. What are the causes? Okay, so if I said to you now, look at these lovely chaps walking down the road here, and you think, right, these guys go into a football game, and you look at them and think, what's the first words you come to describe them? Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. If I looked at that now, you think of this term banded around groups of particularly males going to football games, and you think of hooligans. Okay, so hooligans are groups of people with the sole intention of kind of violence, and then they go to games. You've got the Zulus from Birmingham City. You've got lots of different kind of what would be called ultras or firms. So if you start to think about your first thing as hooligans, okay, you've got a mark. As soon as you see causes of spectator violence, hooligans is the first one because they're a group with the sole intention of harm or violence. Second thing, alcohol. Now, if you watch any kind of films based on, admittedly, they're sensationalising football violence, really. So Football Factory, kind of Green Street. The number one thing you look at is that these hooligans, when they're in a group with a sole intention of violence, usually this is predicated by kind of alcohol or social drugs, okay, which basically pushes people into a kind of higher level of aggression and more chance of violence. Other things that works across from the other one we looked at is rivalry, okay. So, I'll put in here, I think it's really important to use Celtic versus Rangers because, the spectator violence is often steeped in traditional kind of rivalry. And particularly with Celtic Rangers, not just about two football clubs, it's about religion. So it's about Protestant versus Catholic. And this is something that obviously can really fuel violence. Going on from there, we've got de-individuation. Now, de-individuation basically refers to an individual losing their individuality. Okay, so what this means is groups, when you're in a group, you're more likely to adopt the cultural norms within that group. For example, football hooligans, that will be violent, and you tend to lose your individuality and end up just doing what everyone else is doing. Okay. I'll put down here, I think it's just cut off slightly on there. Also, you can use frustration, which carries across from player violence, because often people are frustrated. The fans are frustrated with team performance. Sometimes it can be that they can reflect what's on the pitch. So, for example, you see a group of fans see the players not trying or a fight kicking off on the pitch. They then join in and start fighting with the opposition fans. So, what have kind of governing bodies done? Particularly, I use football as a main example because football tends to have the most people involved in violent acts going to watch a game. Doesn't happen in rugby, and happens in very few other sports, I suppose. So if we go through here then, what are the things have the FA done, particularly the Football Association? Well, they've marketed kind of football fixtures as a family event. On top of that, they've kind of tried to ensure that all football stadia are kind of all-seater, okay? So there's not kind of any kind of examples of crushes where people are kind of standing up and moving to the front, everyone is sat down. And they have kind of the next thing, which will come down in a second, CCTV, so you have kind of constant monitoring both inside and outside the stadium, so people get caught and then they can get retrospective bans from stadiums all across the country. Then you have the kind of link across there from alcohol, so you have alcohol control. It's completely banned in some football kind of events, particularly World Cups, for example. Certainly in England, it's kind of have a thing where you can have it 45 minutes in time before the game, and then you can have it for a 15-minute period at half-time, but that is it. Okay, so you can't take it to your seat as you can in things such as rugby. Policing, so a strategy to prevent it is to increase the policing. If you ever go to a kind of a football fixture, it's always quite... It staggers me the amount of police that are at a football game. Okay, unbelievable. It's a good time to go and commit a burglary if you were that way inclined. So going on from there, segregation. Okay, so now what strategies that the FA have used, or football clubs on their own have used, is to try and separate or segregate home and away fans to avoid that kind of, I suppose, opportunity for violence. So that's kind of what you've got there then. I've gone through that relatively quickly, so quite a few bits to get in. So you're basically looking at kind of, you've got players and you've got spectators, and you've got to know causes and strategies to prevent. Okay, so what we'll do in the lesson, obviously, we'll be having a look at how we kind of could remember them, kind of is there any that kind of themes that run through, but make sure you've got decent notes on that. Final thing we have to look at then are the following. Now, if there is violence in sport, this has certain implications, okay, for the society we live in, sport that it's taking place in, and the performers that are playing the actual sport. So we need to know these implications, these points, or these kind of... I look at it and think, what are the costs? What are the costs of violence for the society, for sport, and for performers? That's a good way to start, really, because if you think of the implications, I just mentioned now about policing. If you think about the implications of violence on society, the first one is the cost of taxpayers' money in terms of kind of policing these events. I said it's staggering. I mean, I went to a game at Wembley. It was just an unbelievable amount of police. Okay, and you think about that. That's a massive amount of money from the taxpayer that is paying that. So going on from there. On top of this, you have negative role modelling. Okay, so the societal impact is that if people are seeing football players, rugby players committing violent acts, this can seep down into kind of general society to young children, because obviously they copy what their role models, their significant others, as we've looked at before throughout the year. On top of that, if you look at that and think, what is the impact of that then with regard to sport from society, is that sometimes parents will actually avoid letting their children take part. Okay, so now I'll give you this extra one now. One final impact on society is going to be basically looking at this kind of reflection thing. You know, sport isn't just violent because of sport's sake, because of the win ethic, for example. It's violent because sport reflects society. Society can be violent. People in society want to watch violent things. So I'll put it just onto here. Violence in the sport reflects society. So some people want to see that, for example, ice hockey fans. If there was not a fight, a violent act in an ice hockey game, fans would not go. Therefore, it's a societal kind of contradiction, I suppose, that we kind of say we don't want it in society, but then it happens in society. So that's just an idea just to get in, just to give you one extra thing to write there. Okay, so next thing then is we're looking at this concept of implications for if violence is taking place in a sport. What are the implications for it? Well, the first one is the negative role modeling, which carries through all of them. So, you know, if on the sport, you have a sport such as football where Luis Suarez, as I put down here, is biting someone, okay, that has a negative impact on sport, okay. And I look at that, it also decreases the reputation of the sport. Okay, so role modelling within a sport can cause problems. And then you talk about then reputation of a sport. I mean, I watched a rugby league grand final, I think it was 2 years ago, and somebody one of the players just knocked a player out with a punch. And, you know, you look at that and think a young person's parents are watching that. It might well lead to them not wanting their child to take part in that sport. So the reputation of the sport can be diminished. Final little section we have to look at then are the implications on the performer. Okay, so the first one, the individual reputation of that sports performer can be decreased. Zinedine Zidane, one of the best players in the history of football, but his reputation will always be linked to him headbutting someone in a World Cup final and getting sent off. And the final thing, of course, the implications of violence for performers are injuries, bans, and fines. These are the things that can cause real problems for the performer. Okay, so there are your key aspects to have a look at. Please make good note.